Hello, my name is Rachel Klamala, Digital Marketing Manager from Nemertes Research. Welcome to our monthly webinar entitled How to Save Money, Get Agile, and Boost Performance as You Migrate to Cloud, the Nemertes Cloud Maturity Model by Nemertes Principal Research Analyst John Burke. This webinar consists of an interactive presentation and moderated Q&A period. To submit a question, please use the control panel on GoToWebinar. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact webinars at nemertes.com. Upon conclusion of the webinar, you will be presented with a short survey. Please answer the questions to provide feedback on this webinar and content for future webinars. We also ask if you would like to participate in our research. In exchange for your participation, you will receive access to our research. A replay will soon be available for viewing on our website. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over now to John Burke.
Thanks, Rachel. Pleasure as always, and welcome to everybody who's joining us today. We will start by briefly introducing Nemertes as a company and the benchmark research that we did that drives this maturity model and all the other research that we do in the space. And then we'll talk about how the mature organization is successfully embracing public and private cloud resources, how they're approaching connectivity to the cloud, and wrap it up with some recommendations, followed by information on the next webinar and Q&A at the end. So please do submit questions. You can put them in through the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel that you should have up on your screens. And Rachel will parse them out and send them to me at the end of the webinar, and we'll answer as many as we can. With that, let's get rolling. So Nemertes, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is a research and advisory firm that does strategic consulting and is focused on the business impact of emerging technologies. We were founded in 2002, and our primary research methodology is to reach out and have live interviews with, live discussions with IT leaders and practitioners. So to really dig in with them, not just on what they're doing, but on why they're doing it. For the purposes of this presentation, we're drawing on our most recent benchmark in cloud networking and security, which had 625 participants who were either interviewed or surveyed, and which spanned 12 countries in 3 regions: North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. It covers a broad range of company sizes and a broad range of vertical industries, with the ones named here: financial services, professional services, manufacturing, healthcare, retail, and education, accounting for half of the participants overall. So let's talk about maturity models. And at Nemertes, we have a basic form that we follow in maturity models. It has 4 tiers, starting with folks who are, for whatever technology space we're discussing, unprepared, typically meaning that they not just lack key systems that would let them deal with that space effectively, but they lack even the information necessary to take effective action in many situations. So they're unable or unaware of situations that need their response, or of emerging opportunities they might be able to help their business take advantage of. We have companies that are at the reactive level, where they have the basic structures and platforms necessary and have access to the information that they need, but they don't have enough together in terms of process and perhaps staff skill sets to be forward-thinking at all. And so they tend to be in a strictly reactive mode. When things happen, they're positioned well enough to take action in response, but they're not able to be proactive. Proactive being the next level up. Level 2, proactive companies have what they need to react, but they're also together enough on the process and staff side to be proactive, to take action to prevent problems from arising, to address opportunities before they pass them by, to address challenges before they become problems. And lastly, the anticipatory folks are taking that a step further and being proactive, not just with respect to stuff that's going on around them right now, but with respect to things that they can reasonably expect to be going on around them in the future, 18 months, 2 years out. With that in mind, with that 0 to 3 scale of things in mind, we took a look at the folks who are being successful in their deployment of public and private cloud resources and discerned the things that they're doing more often than the folks who are less successful, and which combination of these things overall corresponded to being mature with respect to the cloud. We divided it up into 2 groupings, organizational structures and practices, which we're looking at here, and bellwether technologies, which we'll come to in a moment. Key components of an organizational model and a set of best practices in cloud include, first and perhaps foremost, having a cloud strategy that drives and guides activity across a broad set of technologies and a broad set of options for consuming cloud services. And that strategy covers the spectrum, covers everything from what you're doing inside your data center to what you're doing with SaaS or PaaS or infrastructure as a service in public environments. On a related note, the more successful organizations also have cloud architects that have overall oversight on how cloud is being used and how the next thing people are doing in the cloud should be folded into that. They also pursue cloud-specific staffing beyond architects, folks who architect specific solutions. They figure out how to implement a specific thing using cloud resources. They have folks focused on cloud-specific security concerns as well. They also are keeping an eye on how money is being spent and where money is being spent in the cloud, so their cloud budget is visible and is tracked. Ideally, it's kind of all pulled together into one place in the overall corporate budget, but it doesn't have to be, as long as it's all visible and tracked and can be seen by the people at the leadership end of the organization, the architects on the cloud, and IT leadership overall. They'll have, in addition to having some staff focused on cloud security, they'll have cloud-specific security policies, and they'll be making use of automation heavily in their use of cloud and practicing good discipline in their use of automation. We'll dive more deeply into automation in future webinars, as we will also into cloud-specific security policies and activities. For the time being, we're going to just note that having those things in place and already in production are key concerns and key considerations in being mature in your use of the cloud. On the bellwether technology side, we're looking for organizations that are we're looking at organizations that are ahead of the curve in taking advantage of platform as a service, in taking advantage of cloud service brokers, which are tools that let you place workloads in the external environment or internal environment where they're best served. So what is going to give you the best control or the best security or the best cost to performance ratio based on what the workload is. We're also looking at the technologies, earlier deployment of the technologies that let organizations have a true private cloud in their data centers, things like cloud management platforms, converged or hyperconverged infrastructure, use of containers and a DevOps methodology for solution development, looking also at the cloud forward, if you will, networking technologies like SD-WAN and Direct Cloud Connect and WAN-Cloud exchanges, looking at software-defined networking in the data center and the campus networks to complement that use of software-defined technologies facing outwards, and some cloud-first security solutions like cloud access security brokers and single sign-on as a service offerings. Again, we won't dive into all of these technologies through the rest of this presentation, but we will cover most of the main ones. We'll leave containers and DevOps for another time, for a session focused specifically on those two things. And again, the cloud security tools we'll leave to a cloud security session in the future. So one of the things that we do with our clients, and it's a useful exercise for anybody to undertake on the enterprise side, is help them map out where they stand with respect to these best practices and bellwether technologies, what their own sort of maturity model mapping is. And so this is one of our clients, and a look at what technologies they've got deployed, what practices they've got implemented, and it's fairly easy to see that, for example, on the technology side, they're further ahead on deployment of technologies facing outwards than they are on private cloud type technologies, things like converged infrastructure or cloud management platform. On the best practices side, they're ramping up on the staffing side with architects and solution architects in place, but they're having trouble getting visibility on what they're spending in cloud environments and on taking full advantage of cloud automation solutions. So this is the sort of thing that if you're a client of ours, you should be reaching out to us to talk about getting done. And if you're not, well, gosh, we'd be happy to talk to you about that too. So let's talk about some of these public and private cloud technologies and practices, the things that the more successful folks are embracing at a faster pace than everybody else, and some of the key vendors in the spaces around the technologies as well. Starting with platform as a service, we see that by the end of this year, we should have about 40% of the overall population taking advantage of some platform as a service, but already the more successful folks are way beyond that, with 66% of them adopting, and the less successful folks will only see about 34% adoption by the end of this year. So that's something that early leaders are well ahead on. Their use cases are tending to revolve around one of three things: traditional kinds of PaaS operations, like putting a .NET or a Java application out on an application server somewhere in the cloud, run by somebody else, that is, or doing cloud-based integration using a platform like Informatica or MuleForge to bind together applications inside data centers with applications outside, or to bind together multiple cloud applications side by side. And use of database as a service offerings that allow organizations to stop managing every database that they use, stop directing their database administrator time and effort towards every single database that the operation needs, and instead take advantage of databases that are offered as a service and can provide robust services to many applications, and let the organization focus its efforts on other and more critical or higher profile uses of the database administrator's time. Key vendors in the PaaS space: all the major IaaS players, of course, Amazon, Google, IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, as well as key SaaS players, including Salesforce. So these are the folks who got mentioned most often. Others are steadily rising. We've seen Red Hat pop up more frequently as folks get interested in more application platforms in the cloud, and we're expecting this space to see some continual sort of churn of who's most prominently in at the moment over the course of the next couple of years, as more organizations take more advantage of PaaS. One of the metrics of success, touching on PaaS use specifically, that we were using in this round of research when we talk about who's most successful in using cloud, one of the metrics was how much are they spending? So if they're putting X% of their enterprise workloads out in a cloud environment, how much of their budget are they expending in order to do so? Are they spending less or more per percentage point of workload in the cloud than they were with a percentage point of workload in the data center? And what we've seen is that for the folks who are more successful, they're typically not spending more on doing things in an external cloud environment, or they're spending just a tiny bit more, so like 3% more on the PaaS side, whereas on the less successful side, we often see folks are spending more than 25% more on their use of external cloud environments than they are compared with their internal environments. So turning our attention to some of the practices and organizational characteristics of those who are more successful in the cloud, having a cloud strategy. We see it's about 50% overall for folks this year, but amongst the more successful, it's closer to 75%, and amongst the less successful, it'll be 44% by the end of the year. So again, clearly a success strategy, and one that the folks who were early to adopt have turned into an engine of being more successful in their approach to using cloud resources. Having a workload placement process is an important component of a successful cloud strategy. So this is a formalized process that you can use to evaluate workloads and decide where they should go. Should this workload, this next one that I'm taking or paying attention to, either something I'm refreshing or something I'm taking on new, should this workload go into my internal IT environment, into the private cloud, or the rest of the environment that's now the private cloud, more on that in a moment, or should I be putting it out in the cloud? Should I be buying it as a SaaS solution or implementing it on top of some platform as a service offering, or should I be deploying it in infrastructure as a service somehow? And the idea is that by having a consistent set of criteria that reflect organizational priorities and organizational concerns around security, around compliance, around performance for the users of that particular application, etc. By taking into those things into account consistently with each workload that you evaluate, you will continually get the best balance of cost and performance and security and control for your overall portfolio of applications, and you'll always be taking advantage of the best available option for each workload that you undertake. As I noted, the more successful organizations are more likely, significantly more likely, to have overall cloud architects in place by the end of this year. It'll be almost 40% among the more successful organizations, about 25% among the less successful organizations. Likewise, they're more likely to have cloud solution architects. These are the folks who are focused on how to build a specific solution out in the cloud, as opposed to having overall oversight into how it's used. And importantly, the more successful folks are more likely to have staff who are focused on cloud security, and not just focusing on it, but focusing on it, at least one of them exclusively. So there's at least one person whose main job, whose sole job, if possible, is paying attention to securing use of the cloud for that organization. It's not just another hat they're wearing, it's something that they're doing specifically. And we'll see these numbers rise pretty dramatically in the coming year as we see increased attention, continuing increase in the attention being paid to securing workloads in the public cloud. So talking about technology again, cloud management platforms are a critical component of having a true private cloud environment. Certainly, we've been asking folks for years, probably since about 2011, whether they have a private cloud, something in their data center. And since about 2013, the majority of folks we asked that question of have been saying yes. But when we dug into the actual meaning of having a private cloud, of being able to operate your internal environment in a way that makes it look and feel like an external cloud, a public cloud, it all kind of fell apart. Most people were not doing all of the component pieces of offering a cloud service. They didn't have a service catalog, but people could, click on to instantiate things in their infrastructure automatically. There was a deep lack of automation between requesting resources and delivering resources, and there was also a profound lack of accounting for actual use of resources by actual workloads. So what they typically had when they said they had a private cloud was a heavily virtualized infrastructure. The first step and the main step in achieving a real private cloud is deploying cloud management platform of some sort, so that all of your resource pools can be managed together, so that you have a platform through which you can automate the instantiation of specific services in a service catalog, and which can take care of the orchestration of different workloads across the resource pool. So having a cloud management platform is sort of the prime requisite if you want to talk about having a private cloud. And overall, we're seeing only about 37% of folks have it or will have it by the end of this year. But amongst the more successful organizations, it's already past 60% and rising fairly quickly. So that's one to keep your eye on in the coming year. Key vendors in the cloud management platform space, there's a lot of vendors to consider, ranging from the traditional management of folks like BMC or HP or IBM to organizations that have come into it through acquiring strong cloud management players, folks like Cisco or Dell. You've seen VMware play a significant role in this space as it's evolved up from a virtualization platform to a true cloud platform. And we have folks who are focused around open source projects like Nemertes or Platform 9, around the open source cloud management platform there. And of course, Red Hat is a significant player in this space as well with its CloudForms solution. Another key tool that we see used more, or key set of tools that we see used more by the successful folks than the unsuccessful folks, converged infrastructure and hyperconverged infrastructure platforms. We see that overall, a significant portion of hyperconverged solutions are being aimed specifically at private cloud environments. Converged infrastructure is less often, but still significantly often, and both of these used more by the more successful organizations than the less successful organizations. Key vendors include, of course, Nutanix and Pivot3, folks that came up sort of from the beginning as hyperconverged providers, Scale Computing similarly. HP, which acquired the SimpliVity platform and had its own converged offerings as well. Dell and Cisco with converged and more recently hyperconverged offerings of their own as well. With cloud service brokers, we see a very broad difference between the overall pool of respondents and the more successful folks. Overall, we'll see just over a quarter of companies deploying cloud service brokers by the end of this year. But amongst the more successful organizations in the benchmark, the number is almost 50% already. Cloud service brokers include, can be got from vendors including, again, BMC, Cisco, RightScale, VMware, and Cisco and Citrix as well. RightScale is focused fairly exclusively on this kind of functionality, cloud management, cloud service brokering. These other vendors put that into a broader and different context. Excuse me. So now let's turn our attention to the connectivity side of the equation and how organizations are revamping their networking in the age of mature cloud operations. One of the key things that they're deploying more often and more frequently than less successful organizations is virtualization and software definition on their networks. That is, they're adopting virtual networking technologies and SDN specifically more often and more broadly than the rest of the organizations. In fact, where we see just under a third of organizations overall expecting to have SDN in production in their data centers in the coming year, amongst the more successful, excuse me, amongst more successful organizations, we're going to see them passing the 50% mark this year, and less successful organizations will be just over a quarter adopting some form of SDN in their data center. There are lots of options out there, ranging from the more open source oriented folks like Big Switch to vendors including Cisco, VMware, Dell, HP Enterprise, and Pluribus networks. They all have their own flavor of software definition. HPE is focused very sharply on open source based, open flow driven software-defined networking. Cisco has its ACI protocol and its overall intention, if you will, to move into intent-based networking broadly. VMware is focused on the virtualization side of the equation with its NSX solution. And Pluribus has its own virtualization and a software-defined networking controller architecture and is aimed very sharply at the data center and inter-data center use cases. On the wide area network, of course, there's been an enormous amount of attention from us, especially on SD-WAN, software-defined wide area networking, and the application of many of the principles of SDN, centralized policy-driven management through some sort of controller that is in charge of managing a set of data plane devices that do the actual movement of packets from place to place, with some added WAN-specific goodies like the ability to pool many links in providing WAN connectivity, including internet links, the ability to offer multiple virtualized versions of the WAN overlaid on that pool of connectivity. And through that use of virtual WANs to mix and match WAN topologies so that the things that need a mesh and to go directly from branch to branch can have that. The things that need a hub and spoke to pass through some data center somewhere can have that. All of this, as I say, driven by a single centralized policy-based management platform, and again with WAN needs specifically in mind, able to implement policies to prioritize traffic, to optimize delivery either for performance or for resilience or both, and to otherwise improve the delivery of wide area networking services. With SD-WAN, we see about 29–30% of organizations overall planning to have something deployed by the end of the year, but more successful organizations are out in front of that, and 50% have or will have by the end of the year, while the less successful are down at the 20% level. We're seeing very broad interest in SD-WAN driven by many aspects of the technology and of the business case that makes it so compelling. We're seeing that organizations that deploy it are typically able to reduce by half the amount of staff time devoted to managing the wide area network, so they can redirect half of their WAN FTEs to other parts of the network that don't have this level of automation and this level of resilience to take advantage of yet. Their remaining FTEs focused on WAN are spending only 5 or 6% of their time troubleshooting problems on the WAN post SD-WAN deployment. And on average, they're getting 7 times the bandwidth into sites that are equipped with SD-WAN, but spending only a little over half as much as they used to for connectivity. So these are all very compelling components for a business case for deploying SD-WAN. And consequently, as we have noted, we're seeing very wide interest in it. We break the SD-WAN space into a couple of large pieces: the overlay vendors who provide boxes that enterprises can deploy and manage for themselves, or contract with some managed services provider to deploy and manage for them. Key vendors in the overlay space include Cisco, especially since its acquisition of Viptela, 128 Technologies, CloudGenix, Elfiq and Mushroom, Talari, VeloCloud, and Versa. Some of these folks came up out of the link aggregation space, like Elfiq and Mushroom and Talari. Some folks were founded more recently and exclusively to be SD-WAN providers, folks like VeloCloud and Versa. Some folks like 128 have their sights on being a more general network vendor, and they simply started in the SD-WAN space. So it's a very interesting space. There's lots of vendors and new ones still popping up, and other old vendors still getting into the space as they evolve the technologies that they deploy. We see folks like hardline WAN optimization vendors, old-line WAN optimization vendors, I should say, like Riverbed and Silver Peak, pivoting their technologies and turning them into SD-WAN platforms and bringing to that all of their old skills in WAN optimization and application delivery optimization across the wide area network. We also see providers who are focused on delivering SD-WAN as a service, not just through boxes that they deploy to the end user site, but also through services that they provide in their own service clouds. So providing some or all of the SD-WAN key services using their service cloud and not just boxes on premises. Folks here include Apsela and Ariaka, excuse me, big carriers like AT&T and Verizon and Sprint, and folks who have been in this space or close to it for several years now, including Mastergy and TeleIP. If one of the main virtues and attractions of SD-WAN is the ability to fold internet connectivity in place of more expensive options like MPLS links, it's not always the right solution to put the internet in between you and a key cloud platform that you're taking advantage of. Especially when you're talking about integrating a public cloud application with something that's running in your own data center, something in your perhaps private cloud. The goal in back-end integrations is often to achieve high capacity, low latency, and stable connections between the components of an application or between separate applications that are integrating. In order to do that, organizations have, in the last few years, been taking advantage of what's called Direct Cloud Connect. The idea that the enterprise will connect in a co-location space somewhere, a port on one of their own routers to a port on a cloud service provider's router. So my router connecting directly through a piece of cable or fiber to a router for Amazon or a router for Salesforce. By doing that and establishing that kind of direct connection between my cloud and their cloud, I'm eliminating all of the variability in performance that can come with an internet-only link, and thereby giving myself the stability, the low latency, high capacity connectivity that I'm looking for. All the major cloud providers have some option for establishing a direct connection to them, at least on the infrastructure and PaaS side. AWS has its Direct Connect, Google Cloud Interconnect, Microsoft its Express Routes, and so on. And we see that about 33% of, or 32% of folks overall have this or will have it by the end of this year, but amongst the more successful, that number is almost 50% already. And that makes for some significant advantages in delivering services out of those external cloud environments. Now, where you're looking for some of those same benefits, but you're not as sure of the long-term commitment level that you've got with the cloud service providers in question, or where you don't need as high a volume. Maybe you need variable capacity, something that's burstable, but is generally low in terms of throughput. We're seeing more interest lately in the use of cloud exchanges, where I, as the enterprise, connect into the exchange, and the exchange is on its back end connected into a variety of cloud service providers' networks. And then I just spin up virtual links and do my express route through those virtual links. The advantage, of course, is that spinning up virtual links is very fast and has very little lead time. And if you're unsure of the length of time you're going to stay committed to somebody, if you're certain that you're only going to need a limited data stream and you want to multiplex lots of cloud providers' traffic across a single connection into the exchange, all of those things are facilitated by the exchange model. Lots of folks offer exchanges now. Most of the carriers, first tier, second tier, do. And of course, major data center providers like Equinix provide cloud exchanges as well. We see about 27% of organizations overall using or planning on using an exchange to some degree in 2017, but again, that number is nearly 50% among the more successful organizations. And so this is something folks should be paying attention to now. And with that, we'll bring some recommendations forward. Organizations who are intent on being mature consumers of cloud, mature users of cloud, and successful in delivering services using a mix of private and public cloud resources should have a strategy in place guiding how and when they're going to make use of which flavors of cloud. It should cover private cloud and SaaS and IaaS and PaaS all together, and should be the foundation upon which they build a multifaceted evaluation process that will let them place workloads in the flavor of cloud that will serve them best, serve the organization best. They should likewise be building a true private cloud environment based on real cloud management, deploying a cloud management platform of some flavor. Using that and possibly cloud service brokers, they should be modeling and monitoring the costs of what they do in public and private cloud so that they can always be making the most efficient use of the resources that are available to them. To aid in that effort and in the overall successful operation of private and public cloud resources, they should be making or hiring cloud architects to have overall oversight into use of cloud for the organization. They should be having cloud solution architects focused on spinning up solutions in cloud environments, and they should be having cloud security specialists in place who are focused on making sure that use of the external cloud environments is at least as secure as use of the private cloud environment. And if they haven't already, organizations should be evaluating at least all of these bellwether technologies, including cloud management platforms and cloud service brokers, converged and hyperconverged infrastructure, SDN solutions, SD-WAN solutions, and WAN-Cloud exchanges. If you're interested in further discussion of this with us, of course, if you're a client, please contact client services at nemertes.com. If you're not a client, please reach out through sales at nemertes.com, or in either case, you can call 1-888-241-2685, and through that voice menuing system, reach out to either client services or sales as appropriate. Our next webinar, which will be held on 12 September at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, will be Crafting an Effective Incident Response Policy. It will be presented by Jonathan Johnson, our CEO and founder, and focusing on the subject of crafting an effective incident response policy, because in today's environment, realistically, it's not a matter of whether you'll be breached, but of when and how badly. If you need to know how to respond to a breach in order to minimize the damage that is done, in order to minimize the damage that is done to your organization's reputation, and in order to minimize the reach and damage that intruders can do in your network, then come to this webinar, and we'll discuss step-by-step a process for crafting an effective incident response policy. And no matter what your current security framework is, and almost everybody operates within one, whether it's based on the National Institutes of Standards and Technology framework, or whether it's based on the ISO 27000 series of documents, whatever you've based it on, you'll walk away with an understanding of how to work from your framework and craft an incident response policy that will give you the best chance of responding effectively. And again, that's on the 12th of September at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll be able to register through the through the Nemertes website homepage. And with that, I'll say thank you and turn it over to Rachel to shoot questions my way. If you haven't yet submitted a question, please just go to the questions panel on the GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions.
All right, our first question, which SD-WAN provider, Cisco, NSX, NUAD, Noage, OpenShift, etc., will see more prominence in DC?
We'll see more prominence?
Prominent.
I have to say right now that NSX is probably the most prominent solution. It's the most broadly deployed of the solutions in our research, although Cisco's ACI is catching up steadily. And after those, though, it's really the OpenFlow-based solutions that we expect will become most prominent as more organizations deploy open source based cloud management solutions, and with that take more advantage of OpenFlow as well. Next question. Yeah.
What do you think about CloudGenix?
Wow, that's a big question or a small question. CloudGenix is an SD-WAN provider that is, like some of the other companies I mentioned, essentially SD-WAN native. It was founded to deliver SD-WAN type functionality. We don't do ratings of the vendors, so I really wouldn't go any further than that. But if somebody wants to have a deeper discussion, we'd be happy to take a call.
All right. Which buyers in an organization are you seeing most often for IaaS?
Which buyers? It is most often coming out of the out of the solution development shops, which is usually, but not always, touching on the IT organization. In some cases, it's directly in the business lines, but it's the solution developers first, and IT department, general solution architects second. And we think those numbers will invert soon as it becomes more of a general purpose option for providing production solutions and less something focused on delivering solutions developed in-house.
All right. With that, we will wrap up today's webinar. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Again, please join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, September 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern, Crafting an Effective Incident Response Policy, presented by Jonathon Johnson. A registration link will be posted to our website shortly. If you would like to follow up with us and are a client, please send an email to clientservices@nemertes.com. If you are not a client, please send an email to research@nemertes.com or sales@nemertes.com. Thank you very much, and this concludes our webinar.